Welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope. Nothing said on the Low Carb MD Podcast is medical advice. Please consult your own doctor before making any lifestyle changes.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD Podcast. I regret to tell everyone Tro got tied up with patient duties and he's tied up. So I get Dr. Tidman to myself again. If you haven't listened, please cross over, go listen to Life's Best Medicine because we had a really, really great discussion and I loved it. It was so great to hear what she's doing. And so Dr. Tidman, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I feel very honored to be here and talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is my research in Parkinson's.
Yeah, let's go back and tell people your health journey. We'll do that in a nutshell. If you want to hear all the details, go back to Life's Best Medicine and listen to that because it's amazing. But give people, a flavor of how you got into this realm and what you're doing now.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to shorten it, but let's just say that Gary Taubes calls it a conversion experience. I had one in 2013. I had always been health conscious, exercise, ate vegetarian. I was just really into health and got sicker and sicker and sicker, and then had my sort of moment in 2013 when I had all of these really bad diagnoses and all these meds and ended up at Mayo Clinic. And someone there suggested, you might want to think about your diet. Well, interestingly, as an occupational therapist, which I've been doing for 45 years in addition to other things, I knew about some of the treatments in epilepsy, but I'd never really read any of the research. I didn't know what a ketone was. I didn't know any of it. So I came back from Mayo and I decided, what do I have to lose? So I started deep diving into lectures on that first big Cape Town low carb symposium and watched all of those videos, all of those incredible scientists, and ordered every book that was written and read everything. And I just kind of threw out everything I knew about nutrition. Now, I have a doctoral degree in health science. And so one of the things I do for a living for my 4 universities is I teach students how to read the literature, the research. So I was reading research. I was working with patients with Parkinson's, neurological conditions, and in the neurosurgery intensive care unit. And I thought there's got to be some dietary interventions, some natural interventions, because frankly, the meds we have for Parkinson's aren't great. They help the motor symptoms, fine. But they don't do a lot for all of the symptoms that interfere, I think even more sometimes, with quality of life, depression and anxiety and cognition and, memory and socialization and, all of those things.
Constipation you talked about too. Yeah.
Huge. And, since we chatted, I've been kind of deep diving into the gut microbiome research on Parkinson's, and oh my stars, it's just exploding. And some of the things that they're finding in Parkinson's are rather astounding. And the fact that my patients sometimes have gut issues for 20 or 30 years before they ever get their Parkinson's diagnosis. So I've been finding all kinds of things on just that. I feel very novice in my knowledge about microbiome.
We all are. Even the experts are novices at this point because there's so much we don't understand, but we see, you can analyze stool and say, oh, look, this person has Parkinson's. They can tell you just from not even seeing the patients based on the gut microbiome alone. And that's staggering to us, right?
Right. So for 45 years, we've been throwing meds at my Parkinson's patients, and they feel very hopeless. They feel very out of control of their own lives. And if I can give them anything, if I can give them ways to start controlling their symptoms or maybe slowing the progression of their disease, then that's what I'm going to do.
And that's what's so exciting, because that's one area that no one's ever really considered until now. If we talked about dementia getting better or Parkinson's getting better with lifestyle and the connections we've seen, it's staggering, and it's so hard for people to imagine, to say it's something that simple that you can improve your life just by that.
Exactly. Well, the epilepsy research is pretty strong. And when you think about, wow, this approach can actually affect intractable epilepsy, then it's got to have wide neurological applications for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, ALS, some of those other things. And then, of course, I have to acknowledge, number one, my research team, Dr. Dawn White, Dr. Tim White, amazing people. They're the eagle eyes that help me get manuscripts put together and get the data analysis put together. They're just amazing. I've been working with them since 2019. And then, of course, CPF, the Colorado Parkinson Foundation, that provides me with my funding, without which I couldn't do any of this. That's an amazing organization.
And tell them the story about how you got involved with them. That is just amazing to me too. These God things that happen in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. My mother's next door neighbor who helped with my mother didn't live where I live. I knew her. She and her sister and her husband were all on the board of the Colorado Parkinson Foundation. She had nursed her mother through 30 years of Parkinson's. Her husband had Parkinson's. I mean, they had a lot of experience. And one day we were kind of chatting about health and stuff. And she said, my health is terrible. Every member of the board, their health is declining. We're on all these meds. And I said, well, let me teach the board about this approach. I had at that point been very strict on the ketogenic diet for a few years and saw the health benefits myself. I got rid of all of my major health conditions and all of my medications. Didn't need any of it. So I worked with the board on learning the approach. They go on it. They are getting better and getting rid of meds and curing conditions. And then they said, we want you to do research in Parkinson's using the ketogenic approach and name your price. Tell me how much money you need. And it just started this journey since 2018 of just, I give them a proposal on what I want to do. They say, well, sure, have this money and how much money, and we'll add money and whatever. So they are just a phenomenal organization. Just the Colorado Foundation has like 600 members, and they do support groups, and they do just, you name it, they do it. But they have a real commitment to putting more research on natural approaches to Parkinson's in the literature. So, you know how open access fees for publication can be out of reach for most authors. They've really wanted to get our research out there. So they have provided funding for those articles to be published. So, and we have, let's see, including my very first study, which was an exercise study, we have 5 articles in publication as of right now.
Yeah, it's just incredible. And some of your stories, the anecdotal stories that you said, it's just mind blowing. Tell people that don't know about this young guy who had, advanced hospice diagnosed Parkinson's, and what happened.
All right. So through the foundation, a parent, a mother called me, and she had a 32-year-old son in stage 5 Parkinson's. People have to know that Parkinson's isn't an older person's disease anymore. We're getting it younger and younger. One of my earliest onset patients, she was 35 when she had her So anyway, so this mother contacted me and said the doctors have basically sent him home to die. He can't eat, he can't swallow, he can't speak, he can't sit up, he can't, he really is fading away. And I said, I don't know if this will help, but what do you have to lose? So the first step was they had to find a doctor who would put in a peg tube, a feeding tube, because he had lost his ability to swallow. And that took a while because all of the doctors they saw considered him in stage hospice. You're not going to put a peg in somebody who's in stage, right? Or at least they wouldn't. But they found someone who put in a peg. People live with a peg. It's really not a big deal. The beauty about having a peg or some sort of feeding system is you can put in hydration, you can really improve the medication management and the medication levels. And I found them a very high quality ketogenic formula. And this ketogenic formula, of course, one of the main ingredients was MCT oil. And they started giving this young man this oil. And then I kind of taught them the diet, and we sort of worked backwards on, some of the ways they could prepare the foods. But I really emphasized them pushing the MCT oil with this young man. And within, just a couple of weeks, this young man was able to then swallow and speak and ask for things and sit up and work on his computer. He did computer programming and he was big into music, and he just kind of came back. And I just have to say that was that great nutrition, hydration, medication, and the medium chain triglyceride oils, which really, I think, just pulled him back from the brink of death, really.
And that the incredible things when you hear stories like that, it makes me emotional because you go, okay, if that can help bring someone back from the brink, can we do prevention, right? Can we prevent things from happening? Because one of the scariest diagnoses someone can get is Parkinson's, especially if you're 45 or 50 years old and you're, young compared to me at least. And you think, wow, like my life's over. Like I know what's coming. And so it's so scary for people because and we've talked about that with the mood and the emotions and belief, how much of a role that plays when you think you have this chronic progressive disease, or you're just going to be forget everyone's name and you're not going to be able to get out of bed. It's so scary.
It really is. And, they're depressed anyway, because their dopamine regulation is off the rails. And we know that, hope is a big one in patient care. If anything, number one, have tried to do that with my patients all these years, and to give them tools and strategies that they can use. I want them to have a natural approach that they can do to feel some control. My patients feel out of control of their bodies. They got this tremor that's terrible. They can't hardly do any of their activities of daily living. They're feeding whatever. It really is so debilitating. And then their levels of anxiety and depression and all of the things, their fear of being in public. They start withdrawing, isolating, and we know that that's often leads to just more kind of exacerbated depression symptoms.
And sedentary lifestyle, and that worsens the constipation, and everything is terrible, right? Because
Yes.
Not engaging. And we saw that in our seniors during the lockdown period where people weren't engaging, and then mentally they lost it. Their depression, anxiety, stress, all these loneliness is a huge cause of a contributing cause of death, right? So having people be able, like this guy, be able to, and just think of the burden on his mom and dad too, being able to like they'd have to take care of him 24/7 in bed, and now they say he can go to work. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really was amazing. That was one of the stories I shared with you, and then the other one, which I love to talk about this one because this was a gentleman who was 53, very much extremely debilitated, stage 4, can lay in bed most of the day and walk to his bathroom about 10 feet at that with a walker. And when he contacted me about being a part of one of my studies, I said, again, I don't know what this is going to do, but what do you have to lose? Let's try it. He was a chef, so he totally got the diet. That was like a no-brainer to him. And he just went real strictly on it and was testing his ketones and his glucose in the morning. And he had metabolic syndrome. He had morbid obesity and high blood pressure and some psychiatric diagnoses, depression, anxiety. He was on 3 heart meds and 2 blood pressure meds. I mean, he was just, kind of our very example of somebody with roaring metabolic syndrome that I believe was contributing a lot to his Parkinson's decline. And really, within a month, he's up walking. Within 12 weeks, his biomarkers are all normal and he's lost a bunch of weight and he's been able to wean off his pain meds. He had a lot of pain, which is, again, not uncommon in Parkinson's. And he was able to start weaning his blood pressure meds and a lot of his medications. And he actually was in the study for 24 weeks, 6 months. And in 6 months, he's now walking his neighborhood, like a couple of miles, 2, 3 miles. He's working out at a gym with his son. His quality of life is back. He's functional. Um, and yeah, he was still taking his Parkinson's meds. I don't want to, suggest that we can have them stop taking their meds, but can they adjust them? Can they maybe lower them, or do they have a longer, what we call on period, which is when the meds are effective? Can that be extended? Can we deal with the cognition, the attention span? I mean, he really responded to all of that. So,
Yeah, one of the hard, and I don't know, I'd love to ask you on this is, one of the big things about Parkinson's is they'll have a masked face where they can't smile, they don't interact, and they kind of lose their humanness to some degree. Have you noticed that changing also with what you're doing?
what I find is that seems to be very related to, it's kind of connected to the tremor. And if we can do anything to lower that tremor, Um, I find that that improves. Of course, that's always going to be sort of one of those telltale signs. But I just wonder if we can influence the mood is a big one. And if whether some of this could be related to this very low ebb in their mood, in their general mood. And if we can elevate their mood, maybe we can get more of that expression. That's one of the problems. Communication and relationships work so much on the nonverbal communication piece. And when people with Parkinson's don't give any of this visual feedback, other people don't really want to be around them or talk to them or interact with them. It's very socially isolating. So if through this approach, we can raise the beta hydroxybutyrate levels in their blood, raise the effect of the ketones on the central nervous system, and elevate their mood, maybe we can get more of this facial expression and nonverbal interaction. I haven't ever tested that. That would be kind of an interesting one to.
Well, it's so true. I mean, there's studies with kids where the dad doesn't react to them and how quickly they go off on their own and do their own thing. If the dad's looking at his phone, there's studies on this that engage with people. So when someone's, if you're out to dinner with someone and they're looking at their phone their whole time, you're like, okay, this person's not engaged with me at all. And so you see couples that are like that all the time, like they're not engaged at all. And so, just that engagement, the smile, like that sends a message, and kids tune into that. So, when people see you not smiling, they think you're a grumpy, nasty person. And it's like, sometimes you just lose the ability to, but you can still have a sense of humor.
Well, and that's it. And I find too that they get to where they withdraw from social situations. They don't even want to be in social situations because of this stigma that is associated with their Parkinson's. And, I just feel like empowering them to actually take control of their disease process also brings out that willingness to put themselves out there in social situations. The very first study I conducted for the foundation was an exercise study, a community exercise study, with the intention of influencing that socialization, that quality of life. And yeah, we were looking at other things like coordination and balance and so forth. But the big one out of that study that improved was this willingness to socialize. And from that one, when some of those participants actually went on a lower carb, lower processed food, lower sugar diet during the study, it really spurred my very first 12-week ketogenic study to look at anxiety, depression, look at biomarkers, look at symptoms using the Parkinson's scales that we use widely. So it's been a really fascinating journey.
Yeah, and that's it's so fascinating, and it comes back to this whole thing because I've looked at it from one side of the gut lining, right? Looking at the insulin levels and ketone levels and those kind of things. But when you start looking at the effect on the gut microbiome, you say, "Wow, this is amazing!" Because all these communications, and I see it now in certain patients. I go, let's just check your gut microbiome, and they'll have a leaky gut. They have, their dysbiosis like crazy. And so those are things, like you said, you have constipation, you have other symptoms 10 years before you get the motor symptoms even. And so those are things we can clue in on and say, okay, it's not normal to be constipated all the time. A lot of times it can be medicines like, calcium channel blockers or whatever they're on that's causing the constipation. But people don't realize what a big deal that is for people struggling with Parkinson's, that constipation, just having chronic pain, and that takes your will to live and socialize away too.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about all the gut microbiome research is it's really pointing to why that is. Why is constipation such a big deal? Because I haven't found a patient with Parkinson's that doesn't have it. And how can we influence the gut microbiome to deal with that? That is a hugely debilitating symptom in Parkinson's. They don't want to go anywhere because what happens with some of them is they take a bunch of stuff to deal with the constipation. Then they have this chronic diarrhea, so can they ever be very far from a bathroom is the problem. So it really,
and then obviously for the caregivers and family members, the explosive diarrhea they can get, and you can't go out, and then you get less social. And that's what I mean. It's a snowball effect, right? And once it starts down that way, and you just don't want to go engage with people. Yeah, and plus when you don't exercise, the constipation gets worse. So if you go out and engage, and at least some people ride bikes or stationary bikes or go out for Tai Chi or whatever it might be. Just moving and engaging is a huge, huge deal.
Well, it is. And also, another common variable that I see with my patients is they just eat junk. They eat junk food. They eat high sugar and they eat high processed food. And they're trying to get that hit to their brain that they don't have anymore. And that can't be good for the gut microbiome. And so
it may be that they're trying to raise the dopamine levels, and also that they get sugar resistant or insulin resistant in the brain. So they eat more and more sugar trying to get that effect. Hal Cranmer told me that a few years ago. He said, doc, all my patients who come in with dementia eat sugar like crazy. They add it to everything. They have a coffee and they put 6 packets of sugar in there. And then if there's sweets, they eat it all the time. And he asked me why that would be. I said, maybe they're just trying to force sugar into the brain. If you get your sugar high enough that your brain may function, your body's trying to do that. But once if we switch them from running on sugar to running on ketones that you don't get resistant to in the brain, and that's what you've been working on, that's what's pretty remarkable, like that no one's really considered this before.
It's amazing. I actually have the privilege of following some of these amazing researchers who've done so much ketone research. Dr. Cunane's work, Stephen Cunane's work on just ketones being the precursor element to the sustainability of the myelin in your central nervous system. Okay, so we don't have good processing of electrical activity in the brain, and it's depressed because of the lack of dopamine, and we're losing myelination. And so can ketones affect that? Can ketones improve that? And of course, he's finding in mild cognitive impairment and in Alzheimer's that, yeah, they can. And he has kind of centered on about 40 grams, 45 grams of MCT to raise ketone levels to influence things like processing speed and memory. These would be huge in Parkinson's as well, especially in the later stages. And then, of course, Dr. Matt Phillips' work in New Zealand.
He's a great guy and great researcher. It's a super nice person for sure.
Really sure is. And his work on comparing the non-motor symptoms, he compared motor symptoms too, but his big finding was the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's improved more on the ketogenic diet. Yeah, both the ketogenic and the low-fat diets influence the motor symptoms, but the ketogenic diet improved more of the non-motor symptoms. And so I stand on that work as well. My 12-week study that was, I did from 2020 to 2022. So a lot of that was during COVID. Showed some amazing results on depression and anxiety, which you think would be worse during those times. But with the good ketones that and that daily testing of ketones, the Keto Mojo meters, Keto Mojo, another wonderful company. We were able to raise those ketone levels, and we saw, those scales that we use in Parkinson's, we saw those scores improving. So that was
And I'm glad you raised that point too, because if people go back, listen to episode, I think it was either 10 or 13. One was on addiction, one was on mood and ketosis. And Tro and I both made the observation that our patients, their mood, anxiety was getting better when they were on a ketogenic diet. And when we said that, we got attacked for about 3 or 4 days on social media saying these guys are quacks, they're crazy. Food has nothing to do with mood. And we're like, well, now we have Metabolic Mind. We have tons of stuff with Georgia Ede and Dr. Palmer, all these people who are doing great work. And you say that's true. Like, how can we avoid that? And we're seeing a mental health catastrophe on our hands right now. And now we're starting to look at the processed foods and say, maybe that's a problem finally.
Well, what's interesting, in all of our different areas of expertise, we're finding similar things. So that, that's not by accident. When you're dealing with mental health issues, which a lot of my people with Parkinson's have, when you're dealing with neurodegenerative issues, when you're dealing with metabolic issues, I mean, clear up to the, diabetes spectrum here, we're all finding the same thing or similar things. That's the power of the biochemical processes involved with ketones. Dom D'Agostino is doing some amazing work when you're looking at neuroprotection which I totally get in my area of Parkinson's. Can we protect the brain enough to where this Parkinson's doesn't progress? Is there any reason why somebody couldn't live 20 years in stage 1? I mean, can we use the neuroprotective effects of ketones, and what level would that need to be? I don't know.
Well, yeah, and not only that is that post-stroke or post head trauma too.
Right.
They're giving people, a lot of steroids, raising sugars like crazy. They're giving them IV sugar during that time, especially if they're not able to eat. And it's like, oh my gosh, all that inflammation is going to cause more damage. Right.
Yeah.
So can we protect that? And there's some study in the military with, head trauma doing better in recovery if you're giving in ketones rather than sugar. And if that's true, if you are in ketosis and you get into a head trauma situation, like you're going to be better off than you are if your sugars are 400, right?
Right. Oh, well, I have talked to you before about how I wish I knew then what I know now, because I worked many years in the neurosurgery intensive care unit. That was one of I loved working there. But the garbage TPN we were feeding people, I mean, the tube feedings we were giving people while they were comatose, I just think, oh my, we missed a golden opportunity to, really arrest the damage, or maybe even improve that brain function in things like traumatic brain injury and stroke and post bleeds that we dealt with. So
it's terrible because they're still doing that's the standard of care. They're giving them seed oil and sugar basically to feed them, right? And you go, oh my gosh, they're trying to maintain weight. I get it, but that's not the way to do it.
Right. And, it did nothing for, bringing them out of these levels of coma, which was something that I focused on. And I think the biggest thing in the work that I learned there was involving the families, which I did when I started working in that unit. It was the old, you can see your family member for 10 minutes every 2 hours business, which I think is egregious in an ICU. The patient needs the family. They need their families. And so I was working with a medical director of that unit that was totally into let's try it. And so we had our families in 24/7. They could even room in if they wanted to and involve them in the care. That's raising that level of hope, that relationship that's so primary. And I found those patients were beginning to wake up, beginning to interact more because their family was there, people they knew. So that's just another big thing about working in Parkinson's is giving them hope, repairing some of those social situations and those relationships. That's just huge. Well, for all of us, really.
Yeah, for all of us, and we say, okay, if we want to live longer and we want to not get the Parkinson's, a scary diagnosis to get, and some of it, there's obviously other factors like repeated head trauma, like something like Muhammad Ali had, right? Or some of the football players are getting an early onset of Parkinsonian or Parkinson's or like something similar to Parkinson's where they're losing their motor functions. And, maybe that's because all this recurrent head trauma, recurrent causing these motor symptoms and memory problems and all those kind of things. You go, gosh, if we had people in ketosis more, maybe they'd do better. And the other thing, and I don't know if it's published yet, or I know we discussed it a little bit on Life's Best Medicine, but you were doing a study with standard American diet, like processed food diet, versus a ketogenic diet, and then surprisingly a standard diet with MCT oil added to it. And I think that is really interesting data because I think that's going to push science forward. So tell people a little bit about that if you're able to.
I am. So, my first 2 studies were really just you're on the diet for 12 weeks. Let's see what you can do. Pre-test, post-test, lots of biomarkers, 12 weeks and 24 weeks. So after I published the 24-week results, I really wanted to do some sort of crossover trial. And a crossover trial, of course, is when you take the same group through different interventions. And I'm all about comparing you to you because patients are so variable. It's really hard to lump them all and get averages and stuff. Well, that doesn't tend to tell me a lot. So I wanted to take the same group of patients through three different interventions, and I'm actually ongoing recruiting for that study. I'm doing a rolling recruitment for that study, but I've had some preliminary results and some people who've completed. So the first 8 weeks, I do biomarker testing and run all of the Parkinson scales at the very beginning. The first 8 weeks, they just eat their old standard junky whatever diet, and I test them again at the end of the 8 weeks, and that gives us an idea, a snapshot, if you will, of how their body's doing and their Parkinson's is doing with what they normally do, right? And I think that's very diagnostic for them to see that. And then there's a washout period. And then the second 8 weeks, the only thing I have them do, because it's so overwhelming to have Parkinson's anyway, is add one thing, and that is daily MCT oil. And they're raising their levels of ketones in their blood because they start testing every morning for me on a meter that I provide for them. And they are building up to between 3 and 5 tablespoons per day of the MCT or coconut oil. Now, the 3 tablespoons is about that area that Dr. Cunane has settled on, having some good results in terms of cognition. And then the 5 tablespoons is a protocol used by Dr. Bruce Fife, who believes that you can even just add MCTs to whatever you're eating and have some benefit. So they do that for 8 weeks, and I do the testing before and after, and then I'm collecting glucose levels and ketone levels that they're testing every morning through their Keto Mojo app that uploads to my portal, and I love that. They do too. I email them every morning how, that I saw their readings and have that interaction with them. And then there's a washout period. And then the final 8 weeks is a full blown, 70, 20, 10 or 70, 25, 5 ketogenic approach.
Fat, protein to carbohydrate.
Right, exactly. With the added MCT oil still, raising those ketones. And I'm going to be seeing, is there a correlation at all? Correlation, not causation, but correlation between raising these ketone levels in the blood and their symptoms. Are their symptoms improving? And they're doing the scales for me, the self-reporting scales. We're using a sleep scale, which sleep is a huge problem in Parkinson's. And we're using a cognition scale, and we're using a fatigue scale. That is the biggest issue I'm finding. Their fatigue is off the charts. So can we get some improvements there just, by comparing them to them through each of these phases?
So what are you seeing in that second phase where you have the regular diet where you're adding MCT oil? Do you see benefits still?
So interesting. This is just preliminary results. I am seeing some improvements. They are reporting improvements in fatigue. One of them, I've just had like 4 complete. So again, this is very preliminary. One of them was saying his sleep was just completely normalized. One of them reported some decreasing in tremors, and this is in phase 2. All they're doing is adding some MCT oil, building up their ketone levels, and yeah, they're getting up above 0.5. Yes, they are. And you wouldn't think so, but they are. And what they're reporting to me in that phase 2 is, I'm not craving all the junk so much. I am not really wanting that nighttime bowl of ice cream, or I'm finding that they're reporting when I got to phase 3, I was ready for it. I don't even want any of that stuff anymore. So I wonder if the ketones aren't providing their brain with what it needs, and then those cravings really start to diminish. So by the time they get to phase 3, they're kind of ready for it.
Oh wow, yeah, that's something too, right? That's just something too. And then and there's good data on the MCT or ketones helping to
Right.
repair the gut lining too. So if you're having a really bad leaky gut and you're getting a lot of this lipopolysaccharide, toxins into your body, that may be having some benefit too. And even though they're eating the standard American diet and just adding that to it, which surprises me actually, but it's very encouraging.
Exactly. I was just listening to Nick Norwitz talk about how the epithelial cells in the gut lining also create ketones. And that localization of ketones in the gut, um, irrespective of the blood levels. So that was kind of news to me. And looking at, would that help the symptoms of constipation? Would that help some of this gut microbiome problem? One of the big things being identified is this abnormal protein, the alpha-synuclein, I'll call it alpha-syn, that is present in the gut, that really kills off some of the beneficial bacteria, and interestingly, can travel up the vagus nerve into the central nervous system and create some of these abnormal proteins. Again, I'm very novice in my understanding of this, but what an exciting area to start focusing on. Would ketones benefit the gut microbiome to the point where some of this protein deposition of abnormal proteins in the central nervous system actually diminish? Um,
Yeah, and all this data and all this money they spent they were following these tangles in the brain, and a lot of it was fraudulent data. And so it's
right.
so frustrating, but there's data on this with the vagal nerve. It's incredible how these microbiome can migrate up and down. And I just had this discussion with Paul Mason actually, and I was actually surprised by some of the data he was talking about. It's on Life Best Medicine. If anyone wants to hear it with Paul Mason, it's really good. We destroyed the whole medical system, and it was a really great discussion. He's a really smart kid. Anyways, all these things that you think about is like, wow, if we're attacking both of those areas, and if you go, okay, gut microbiome makes a difference. Okay, high insulin, high inflammatory markers make a difference. Maybe the best approach is to, and so my concern, as a matter of fact, is personally for me. My dad just recently got diagnosed with dementia. He's been saying he's forgetting stuff, and he's been through a lot of stress with his partner having it. His longtime girlfriend had a stroke, and so,
Yeah.
anyways, he goes, "I'm just slipping," and I go, "And I don't think you're slipping, Dad. I think it's just that you're under a lot of stress and you just can't focus as well." So, anyways, I played it. Our interview for him, and I played another interview with Hal Cranmer, and he had
Mhm.
so much hope afterwards. And so he's on Health Code, they don't sponsor this podcast, but they sponsor my other podcast. And so it's like, Dad, just start doing Health Code to get these good MCT oils, all these things. Just so it's so helpful. People like you who are on the front lines, that we can give people hope that they can hold on and not just give up. And
Right.
so my mom on it, my dad's on it now. Say, hey, look, clean up because he was having, waffles, like whatever from the store every day. I'm like, Dad, look, you cannot do
Right.
that anymore. So cutting those things and cleaning that out, getting some MCTs in, and he's already feeling a lot better. His inflammation's going down. His cognition is better. And you go, wow, how many people are just, and this was the thing as a doc. I know it's a problem because a lot of families I've talked to, dad's getting dementia, and they go, "Look, dad's not going to give up his ice cream every night. He's not going to give up these things." It's like, well, if he's not going to, why don't we make him a ketogenic ice cream that he can have and let him
Right.
enjoy it, because he's not going to know any different, right? And he just wants that sweet taste, because your brain is I think it just craves that stuff when you start getting into these problems. So to tell people you can't have that anymore and make them suffer for the last couple of years of their lives, like, let's give them something that that's healthy for them, with MCT oils and ghee and whatever it might be, and giving them the best quality of life, and see if we can't reverse some of this.
Well, I've always wondered a couple of things. Number one, are these tangles and proteins in the brain causal? Or are they a reaction of the brain to the inflammation that is rampant in their body? I have found a lot of people who enroll in my studies, and I do those initial biomarkers, their insulin is off the charts, 50, 60.
It should be less than 5 or 10 for people listening. Like
Exactly.
that's what we see with diabetes, pre-diabetes, and they call dementia type 3 diabetes.
Right.
So if we don't take that seriously, we're going to be in trouble.
Right. And their HSCRPs are
Through the roof.
quintuple, more than quintuple what they should be. And so is it the motivation that sets up just those depositions of tau proteins and things in the brain? I don't know. But I do know that if we can make them healthier metabolically, can we influence their progression of their Parkinson's disease? And this is the focus of my research. And can a lot of them too are full-blown diabetics when they start in my studies. They've got A1Cs of 15 and 10, and they've been on insulin, and they've been on metformin, and they've been on their sugars are still uncontrolled. Their sugars are 200, and even on their meds.
And the thing is, it's no surprise. We have data on this, and they've looked at it with poorly controlled diabetes and depression. Huge correlations, right? Causation, and the causation is they found, and looking at the data and studying people, is that the sugars were high before they got depression. They didn't get depressed, so they said, "Screw it, I'm going to eat whatever I want."
Right.
The high sugars led to the depression, right? Then they kind of just give up on life and just keep eating that stuff. And so, there's so many people, and that's why I'm so glad we're doing this podcast. There's so many people listening and say, yeah, mom's slipping, dad's slipping. And I'm telling you, over the last few years, and it's a complicated situation, but a lot of people are getting diagnosed with dementia and Parkinson's and these kind of neurodegenerative stuff. And one concern I have, there's a lot of concerns, but anything that causes chronic inflammation, like you're saying, the tangles in the brain. Well, is atherosclerosis protecting the blood vessels that are damaged, right? With high sugar, high insulin, high stress, high blood pressure. So when we start looking at those things, I think we have to really step back and reevaluate what we're doing. Because one of my concerns also has been that, the cardiologists now are trying to get, LDL cholesterol down into the 20 and 30 range, and you go, what kind of effect? If people listening, don't take my word for it, Google it. Google the correlation between longevity and cholesterol levels.
Exactly.
And they'll say, they'll say, we can't explain why this is a conundrum for us. They call it like the French effect type thing, where the French eat all kinds of fat and they live forever. And they said, how can it? So the correlation is the higher the LDL cholesterol, the longer you live, right? Of all cause mortality. And you think, what are we doing to our Hey, if you're 40 or 50 and you have really high cholesterol, I get the concerns. But when you're 80 years old, should you be on a statin drug when you're having dementia and Parkinson's?
Exactly. Well, if you understand even pediatric development, it just makes sense to me that infants who need to have their brains protected, who need to develop their brains and their bodies and their organ systems, they're in ketosis before they're born and after they're born if they're breastfed. And does it not make sense then that we can have that kind of neuroprotection in Parkinson's if we look at those same macronutrient ratios that babies are getting that protect their brains through that incredible spurt of development that they have to do? In addition, a lot of Stephen Cunane's work, he's looked at, and actually I heard Volek and Finney are working on a study about ketones and the heart and congestive heart failure. Is that
we have data on that already too, that cardiac function improves, and they're doing another follow-up to that. We have data on that, and some people I've talked to, cardiologists, people go into ketosis, guess what? They come off their diuretics. So it's one of those things, their heart gets better. People, and the common knowledge is like, well, you need a bunch of sugar to run on every day. Your body will make it. Don't worry, it will make it if it needs it.
Exactly. Well, and again, many of my patients with Parkinson's don't only have Parkinson's. They have diabetes and heart disease
It's
and
metabolic
kidney
disease.
disease. Of course it
It
is.
all runs together. Yeah.
Right. And so if we can influence that at the same time that we're building ketone levels, I have consistently my research participants in my 12-week and 24-week studies said I could pay attention at work. I could finish projects. I could sit down and get a project done from start to finish. Whereas before, I was having to take breaks and, I was being not very productive at work. So they're finding just the cognitive benefits. Um, and that's their livelihood. Many of them are young. They're supporting a young family. We need to get them functional. So a lot of the Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment literature really feeds into what I'm doing because that's such a problem, especially as that Parkinson's progresses. But is it progressing because of the Parkinson's, or is it progressing because of the inflammation and of the lack of
Not exercising, not sleeping, all these things play a role. If you take someone,
yeah,
you sleep deprive them, they start getting memory issues. I know I do if I don't sleep, or, back in the day when I was in training. So all those things are we starting to realize how it all goes together. And if you get
right?
someone healthier and they're more active, then they sleep better. And I mean, all these things start, it's like a country song backwards. I always say it's like everything comes back and everyone's getting better. And to see someone improve, I mean,
Yeah,
it's dramatic. Like to hear that story, if you weren't in his life, like these things that you look at, like if you don't help, he's dead by now, right?
right,
32
right.
years old, dying, and you go, wow. Once if we intervene, especially if we're getting a feeding tube, throw some MCT down that thing, right? Get
That's
some good
right.
protein source and all that. Let's help nourish you and see what happens. And that's why I've been concerned. And I don't know. I mean, I know we have these food guidelines, the food pyramid. I get it. I don't know how many people actually listen to it. So my concerns, one is if someone's like what you experienced, you were on a vegetarian vegan diet and you have all these health problems, and now you start eating differently and all these things get better, right?
It's pretty, it's so astounding that you can't even believe it's true. I think that's the biggest roadblock that I find is people aren't going to believe that food's that powerful. They don't connect food and health. I don't get it because our food is our fuel. So how are you going to run these functions in your body without the proper fuel? How are you going to run your car not on the right fuel? It just makes sense. And just through some simple changes, and what I'm trying to demonstrate in this crossover trial is if really all you can do right now is add some MCT, then by all means add the MCT. And then maybe that will help those cravings to diminish. Maybe that will feed the gut microbiome. We are finding some of them are reporting, hey, constipation is gone as long as I stay on my MCT oil. So um, it seems pretty simple. It's not easy. So I always tell my patients this is a very simple approach, but it's not easy. We're, facing coming up on the holidays. I live in New Mexico and getting Hispanic populations, Native American populations, a lot of their culture is built around foods that are very inflammatory. And, getting them to say, okay, during the holidays, yeah, I'm going to eat every bit of that. And then they plummet, they really decline and get into some trouble. And
So it might be just saying, let's add some MCT to that. At least if you're not going to change, let's at least add some MCT and get some good fat source for you, avocados or whatever it might be, right?
right. I mean, can that little change be a little bit protective of that huge decline that you'll get if you go totally on your sugars and stuff? But I don't know. I do think that
Better not to, right? But it's such but it shows the addiction part of it too. And that, people say, I don't care if I'm going to have all these issues, I'm still going to do it sometimes. And so, I think when people are bought into lifestyle, and that's what's nice is that now people are going to seek you out, and that's going to help to, these are people that already said, okay, I think there's some benefit. I mean, people listening, I know a lot of people listening are going to understand this phenomenon because I've seen it in my career, and I didn't understand it before. I thought it was a spiritual thing mostly, but someone will have advanced Parkinson's or advanced dementia, and sooner or later you stop eating, right? When you stop eating, they stop eating for 2 or 3 days. Then all of a sudden they'll say, oh, you know what? Someone, they didn't know your name. They didn't know their wife's name or their kid's name. All of a sudden they'll say, oh, make sure here's the password to my, or like, what? Like the person is like talking reasonably, but this moment of clarity. And that's probably because they're finally going into ketosis, and their brain it gives you one last chance to try to survive. Right.
That's right.
And so it might be reasonable to, with that mental clarity and all that. And if you think about every religion in the world does fasting or time restricted eating at some point and getting some degree of ketosis so they can seek God clearly.
That's right. Well, it makes sense that he who created us would give us fasting as a tool that we can use. And, it is amazing how neuroprotective that is. And a lot of times what I find is my patients with Parkinson's get to the point where they can't put on weight. They can't keep weight on. Well, it's because they're subsisting on nothing but empty.
Goldfish crackers and that kind of stuff. Just
precisely.
Right?
And the fats being so nutrient dense and so calorie dense, I can actually teach them how to put some weight on, put a little bit of healthy weight on. And,
plus healing the gut too. If you heal
right.
the gut, you're going to absorb your nutrients that much better.
Right. Well, one of the things too in Parkinson's that happens is, bless them, neurologists really caution patients about protein. And it's going to affect your meds. And it does diminish the effects of the synthetic dopamines that they're taking. And so a lot of them eat basically no protein. And so a lot of my patients with Parkinson's are very sarcopenic. They just have a lot of muscle wasting. And of course, they're not exercising. So we have this sort of cascade in terms of their weakness and their muscle atrophy. And so one of the things I work with them on, and of course, the ketogenic approach I use isn't high protein, but certainly you need to eat some protein, is the timing of the protein and the timing of their medications. And it's not necessarily the protein itself that you need to stop eating. It's that you need to time those things so that it doesn't interrupt the function of your medications. And that's a little tricky until you can figure out that schedule. But, I want them to have at least 20% protein in their diet, because they're all, most of them are older and they're very sarcopenic. And I just feel like protein needs to happen.
And sarcopenia, meaning lack of muscle, that's the number one indicator of dying, right? If muscle mass, you live longer the more you have. So when people have no muscle and they're just sitting in bed, and so like just getting mom out to exercise a little bit, get on the bike, move a little bit. Right. And there's definitely benefits to the brain and functioning. So it's so important. I think there's so many things that we just let slip. I mean, we didn't live like this 30, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, people were eating healthier and they didn't have all that stuff and they did better. So I think, with all the medical technology we have and advances, we've lost the plot at some point, not looking back at nutrition like you're doing. And it's amazing. Your work is so encouraging. And tell people all the big money you're making doing this.
I'm just making a lot of money. Boy, I got the sun blowing in through the window here. It is really, I can turn my camera. It is, that's a little better.
You get some nice sun there. Yeah, good.
New Mexico, it's always sunny and I love it. And I love working by this sunny window, but it's a little, it's a little weird right now. So yes, I am just getting very wealthy doing all this research. So I don't take any money for the research that I do. And I don't take any money for all the telehealth patients I work with. I have a philosophy to provide medical care to people who can't afford to pay me for it. I also, my team and I, Dr. Dawn White, Dr. Tim White, and then two members of the Colorado Parkinson Foundation board have just submitted a manuscript on my third book. And it's going to be Families in Parkinson's, a survival guide. It's going to be a guide for families.
Wow.
Going to have all the, just you name it, it's got it. It's got the science in it, but it's also got practical tips for daily living. It's got a lot of information on the different medications and the different imaging studies and the resources. And then I wrote a nutrition chapter. Yes, I did. It's like compiling it all. And I highlighted some of the main dietary approaches used. And of course, the ketogenic section
Wow.
is long. But all of those royalties also are going back to the foundation. So I feel like I was given a new calling, and this is kind of how I do it.
Oh, it's amazing. Is this QR code down there? Can people scan that if they're watching on YouTube and stuff?
Yeah, that's to the Colorado Parkinson Foundation.
Okay. If
It,
they want to track you down or be part of your studies, how do they track you down?
yeah, on the Colorado Parkinson Foundation website, at the top, you click on study. And it's all of the presentations I've given on all of my research. It's all of my research articles. It's the recruitment information for the current study that I'm recruiting for. And yeah, they can definitely reach me there for more information. And again, all of the study costs are paid for by the foundation.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's such an amazing, what a scary thing. And I think that's such an amazing resource for people. In your book, tell people again what it's going to be called. So we'll do this again when it comes out.
Yeah, so Families and Parkinson's, survival guide. And I have two other survival guides that I've published, one on intensive care. How do you navigate the intensive care unit? It's a big one for
Wow.
families. That was published in 2014. And then the sequel book was Families in the Rehab Center and Beyond. So you get your family member to
Wow.
the hospital, to the rehab. It's very different. Families don't know a lot about it. They don't know their rights, what they can request. They don't know Medicare guidelines, what that involves. And then there's a section on what equipment do you need to go home with? What
Yeah, so
that
great.
up?
I've seen people just sent home and they have nothing and they just send them home. They go, we'll be there in a week or two and help you. And it's like, how do I get mom in the shower? All that kind of stuff. So that's such a great resource. And
Right.
can they get that on Amazon?
Yeah, it's everywhere. Both of those are
Uh,
kind of everywhere. And then this
well,
one
send
will
me the link and I'll make sure we put it we'll get this on the podcast so people can
okay.
find it. Cause that's a huge, anyone listen, that's a huge resource. I mean, it's so frustrating because I've had it happen with patients and families calling me like, what do we do? We don't have this. And, like to know before you get out of the rehab, what you're going to need at home to
Well,
keep
it's
mom and dad
interesting
healthy.
because my rehab book came out in 2017, and I was thinking, oh, it's probably a little outdated. Well, interestingly, last week I had a patient's family say, their family members in the hospital, and she's broken a hip and she needs to go to rehab. And I gave them my book, and they used it. I mean, they used everything in there to, request the family care meetings and to appeal
Yeah.
insurance denial for extended stay in rehab, and what equipment do we need? And they ordered a shower chair and a bathroom. It actually still works, so that's good. But yeah, and then the family guide for Parkinson's is going to be the same thing. You're going to they're going to experience these things and get ready for it. And this is what you ask the doctor about. And here's a medication side effect. And this is what you can do about that. And
Wow, it's great. Minimizing side effects and,
right.
nutrition, this is a great resource, everyone. I'm excited about it myself. This is really fantastic.
It just went into the publisher this week, and so I'm hoping it will be published sometime in the spring of 25.
And
It's been a great collaboration between my team and the two members of the Colorado Parkinson Foundation board have worked with family members, lived with family members, taken care of family members with Parkinson's. So all of their chapters in there are so practical. And, add this, out of your kitchen cupboard. It really helps with this. And I mean,
Yeah. And even, yeah, just, and probiotics maybe, or,
right.
fermented vegetables, whatever it might be, things like whatever we can do to help get that gut, the brain, insulin level down, inflammation levels down. It's just amazing. By the way, on exiting, any any supplements that you think are promising that you've looked at that may be beneficial to add into the diet? Like one of the things that's come up several times for dementia is creatine, which a lot of us think is for putting on muscle mass. Have you heard anything or read anything about like creatine or any other supplements that may benefit us when we're metabolically sick?
Well, so I am into food, but I'm also into supplementing when it needs to be. Many of my patients, like I was indicating, are very sarcopenic. So yes, we boost the magnesium, we boost some creatine. Interestingly, nobody thinks about my women who are postmenopausal who also have osteoporosis and they're at risk for fracture. So I really look at some of their bone markers because all of these things feed into their Parkinson's. If I'm afraid to fall because I fracture, I'm not going to do anything. And then I think that all has to do with sleep. So many of them have vitamin D levels that are in the basement. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to test their vitamin D, and those levels are at 10. And
yeah, incredible. Yeah,
they need to be above 50, and so their sleep, is bad anyway. So yes, I do use some of that. Some of the research coming out, the gut microbiome again is something that I really want to start looking at. Is the use of probiotics and prebiotics in Parkinson's, and can we boost the microbiome with ketones? Yes, but also with a prebiotic or a probiotic to really influence the gut's ability to create ketones. And I think it's very exciting. Am I a big proponent of whole food? Yes, I am. But so many of my patients don't have access to fresh food. It's, if they're going to do any veggies, they're canned. And so can I boost them a little bit with some supplementation? So being a metabolic health practitioner, I really do try to look at the whole picture and give them supplement suggestions when I think it's indicated. So yes, I think prebiotic, probiotic, that's very exciting research in Parkinson's. See if we can fix this gut issue. The gut-brain axis is something that's being just exploding in terms of research right now. But then don't neglect the rest of the body. Maybe some creatine for building some muscle. Get the protein intake up to where a level where it won't necessarily interfere with their meds. Get them exercising, get them feeling better so they can even just take a walk or whatever it is. It's so multifactorial. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping. So we can look at all those factors.
Have you ever crossed paths with Martha Carlin from BiotiQuest?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to connect you to. Okay. So everyone go back and listen to that episode on Life's Best Medicine with Martha Carlin talking about this stuff. So maybe I'll send you the link to that interview and I'll connect you to, because I think using her stuff with what you're doing is really exciting. What maybe we can accomplish looking at the gut microbiome. Doc, thanks so much for joining me. This is so important. I think it's really going to help a lot of people, and it's really, really encouraging that you have all these books to help people through all these end of life issues, and as we get older, stuff we're all going to face with our families, and so
right.
yeah.
And I didn't even mention, the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, and one of my big goals is to get different professionals in different areas working together, maybe doing a research study together, or publishing together, so that if somebody's doing a lot of work in Parkinson's and gut microbiome, then we can partner on looking at a small study or publishing a scoping review or whatever that really gets the literature kind of flooded with our approach. So that's one of my big goals for the academy that I've created for the society.
Awesome. And it's exciting. You just think about getting exercise people working with, everyone doing their own part and seeing how much we could help these people improve with their functionality and everything. It's really exciting. So thanks for all the work you're doing. Thanks for joining me. Tro's going to be jealous. He missed out on you, but
I feel so privileged to
patient
be
stuff.
Thank you for inviting me, and let me know if you need anything from me.
All right. Keep up the great work and just thank you for everything. Have a great weekend. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
You too. You too.
Right.
Thanks. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon by going to lowcarbmd.com.